Hey folks, welcome. In this video, we're going to talk you through tripods, why you want to use one, when to use one, and talk you through the 9 key variables that you want to think about when you're selecting one, as well as the 3 things that are going to end up being trade-offs that you need to balance when you decide what model is going to suit you best. Now, if this is your first time here, please do click to like and subscribe, ring the bell for future notifications. I put out a couple of different photography related videos every week, and I also have 2 different dedicated training platforms, mattgrangerphotography.com and artnudeportraiture.com, where you can download complete tutorials. And you can also grab a completely free copy of my gear buying guide that covers all kinds of equipment. I'll pop links for all of that in the description below. Now, I have a feeling this video is going to get quite long and maybe a little bit complicated as we run through all of the different variables. So we'll have a clickable timeline in the description below, and I'll have links to the different tripods that I recommend at different price points so you can go straight on over and check them out. First off, let's clear some of this stuff off the table. I'll leave the giant guy there because he's too heavy to move. Okay, so let's talk through some of the different times that it's worth using a tripod and what the value of it's going to be for you. The first one that is probably apparent to most people is when you want to use a slow shutter. Now, the most obvious use for that is when you're shooting something like a waterfall or something where you want to include movement, but you don't want the camera to move. So then you put it on a tripod, you want it to stay perfectly still, so the things that aren't moving are nice and sharp, and those areas that are moving, like the water on a waterfall, get nice and blurred out. But also, you can do it when you're shooting totally static subjects. If you're shooting an indoor scene and it's really dark, using a longer shutter speed is going to let you bring down your ISO, which will get you overall a cleaner file. Tripods are also really handy when you're shooting composites or time lapses. In both of those situations, generally you don't want the frame to move at all, but you want to shoot over a period of time and then put the photos together in post. There you're going to want a tripod, and you're going to want to have it taped down to make sure it doesn't get bumped. Also, long lens photography. If you're out shooting wildlife or something like that with a giant 500mm lens, in one way, you might think a tripod is going to be limiting, but there's a couple of reasons why it's a great idea. One, those kind of days tend to have a lot of weighting. That means the camera can weight on the tripod rather than you carrying it. That's going to mean you're less fatigued and you can stay out shooting longer. Also, with the right equipment, it will help to support you as you're getting those long lens shots and help you get the frame right, hold it in the right place, and get a sharper shot because it will minimize the small amounts of vibration that your hands might introduce to the shot. And another one, an obvious one, is video. If you're shooting video, hand holding it, even with modern stabilization, isn't always a great idea. To have the ability to get really smooth movements if it is a moving shot, or solid shots if it's one where you don't want the camera to move, using a tripod is really important. Next up, let's talk through the 9 different key variables that I think you want to think about when you're going to select a tripod, whether it's your first, second, or third. And spoiler alert, all the tripods I'm showing here I actually own. I guess I have about 10. Most photographers, after shooting for several years, may end up with 2, 3, or 4. You will find that some things serve a different purpose to others, and that your best tripod won't actually suit in every situation. So think about exactly how you shoot. Don't pay too much attention to the brands and stuff on display here. We're talking about the key variables of how you'll use them, and then buy to your budget. Again, I'll have links for all of that below. So let's talk about heads. The first type of tripod head that we're going to talk about is a ball head. This is an example of one. It's called a ball head because it has a ball as the main mechanism. Now that will let you reasonably smoothly move around in all directions. They normally will have a cutout so you're able to put it down to shoot in portrait orientation. And then a more advanced one will have a friction dial, which will actually let you adjust the resistance of the movement, which can be handy if you want to use this is a stills tripod. If you want to use a stills tripod also to use video, to be able to adjust the friction is good. And then you can lock it down, and they lock down really well. And All heads come in all different sizes, not different shapes obviously though. So from small, like a ping pong ball, to a golf ball, to bigger than a golf ball, through to gigantic ones. The bigger the ball mechanism generally means the more fine adjustments to movement you're going to be able to make with your shots. And generally, the bigger the head overall will mean a bigger weight rating for your tripod. But still, you wouldn't have a head this big on legs this small because that's going to be imbalanced. We'll talk a bit more about that in the weight section. Next up are fluid heads. Now this is two different examples of fluid head tripods. They're generally used for video work, and this is quite a big one. It will go up higher than me with its 3-segment legs. This is also quite a big one, and then we have a much smaller one that we're actually using right now that you saw in the intro, which also does a good job. But again, the bigger the head generally means more weight and smoother movement. There's all kinds of different technologies out there. I'll put a couple of different price points in the description below. But essentially the value of them is they're easy to make a quick adjustment so that you can level it, so that you make sure your horizon is straight in the shot. And then they will have different adjustments so that you can adjust the resistance or the drag to make panning shots, tilt, that kind of thing. So you can really make it nice and smooth. So if you want to be able to do it more quickly, then you can really ratchet down the tension and get a quick movement, or you can really tighten it up so then when you do it, it really nice and slowly moves through the shot. They're generally more expensive. These heads are more complicated, and these ones from Manfrotto have a lot of technology in them that really give you the smoothest possible movement that you can get for your shots, and they can lock down so tight that you can be using a big cinema camera and still have the smoothest movement. Essentially though, same with ball heads, the bigger the camera system you're working on, the bigger the head you're going to want to make sure it's nice and sturdy. Now there's a few different tripod head types that I don't actually have in studio, so we'll put some images on screen for you. The next one is a gimbal head. This is really handy for shooting with long lenses. It gives you the flexibility to get all kinds of smooth movements, and generally they're weight rated to really heavy camera systems like over 10 kilos, which is heavier than even a big giant sports camera with the biggest lens you can imagine. Really great for that purpose, but kind of useless for any other purpose. Next up, you have pan and tilt heads. Now, as the name suggests, they will only let you turn on the horizontal axis and the vertical axis, but it doesn't let you get adjustments this way. It's basically for people who are doing architectural photography. They're often measured out so you can get a really precise adjustment to what angle each of the settings are on. Less useful for general photography though. Then you have this kind, which is a tilt only. So this will let you tilt it up and down if you're shooting straight on, basically up and down, but it doesn't give you this angle and it doesn't give you this angle. They're generally used with monopods because they themselves give you the panning capability. That's really their only use because it would be very limiting to only be able to bow the thing up and down. But for a monopod, really, really handy to have a good quality head. These are generally sold separately, but a good quality monopod with a good quality head can really be useful even for long lens photography. It can really stabilize your shots. Another specialized type of head is a 3-way, so that will give you each of the different parameters. So your this direction, and your panning direction to give you the finest control. So you can get all of those same positions with a ball head. Obviously, it will let you go in all of the directions, but this will let you one by one adjust them. It slows you down a lot. If you're used to a ball head, you're going to find it really finicky, but if you are doing detailed shooting, that's an option. And the last one is a pistol grip head. Now, this is essentially a ball head, but instead of having a dial that you lock down and adjust the friction, it has a pistol grip. So as you start to pull on the grip, it will start to release the tension and let you slowly move. If you pull the grip all the way, it will let you freely move it around. They're the main different types of heads. Now, a lot of the kits that you look at will come with a tripod and a head, and they generally all come with either a ball head or a fluid head. but you will be able to get some tripods as legs only, and then you can put any head on that will suit your needs. So that's one of the 9 variables we want to talk through. That was the most complicated though, but let's pick up the pace. Next up is weight rating. Now, no surprise, this can't support quite as heavy a kit as this. You will generally find a higher weight rated tripod is itself heavier, but not always. It does sometimes come down to the build quality. You know, sometimes you can exceed it. It's not necessarily that going beyond it. So say, this might say it can hold 100 grams. This might say it can hold 10 or 15 kilograms. It's not that if you go over that weight, you're risking to damage the tripod per se, but it means at what point do they not think it's going to be 100% stable. So if you have a big DSLR on this with a 70 to 200 lens, you're going to be fine. Just make sure if the lens poking out, it's over one of the legs, so it's not going to tilt it this way. But even with this kind of a kit, if you were using like an 800mm lens, you might find that this is not quite a big enough tripod for you, and that you should be stepping up to the next generations even higher. This is, in the world of Gitzo tripods, they rate them by numbers. So this is a 2 series leg. You might want to go to a 3 or 4 series to use the biggest, heaviest equipment that you have. Next up is tripod height. Now, get this guy back again. This is another series 2. When I talk about height, I think there's 2 measurements you want to keep in mind. One is how high will it let you go up? So this has 4 leg sections and the legs will go that long. If you're extending the legs all the way and then having to like stand it up, not quite spread out. So it wants to be set up, let's do it down like this. It wants to be like this. Let's say that's not high enough for you. So if you're putting it up a little bit like this just to get that extra couple of inches, it's not stable anymore. Better to go for the next size of tripod up. The other measurement you want to keep in mind is how small does it pack down? So, you know, whatever that length is that going to fit in your bag for when you're traveling? A lot of these will have an option to be reversible, so you can bring the head up and then flip the legs, and that brings the overall size and compactness of the tripod down significantly and lets you pack it into a bag without, you know, having so much dead space. Coming back to that point of weight, you want to think about the weight and the construction. Now, as I said, this video isn't sponsored and I'm not trying to push you to a particular brand. There are some times where brand is important, like if they're going to all use the same head, that's really helpful if you're using multiple cameras to not have to keep changing the plates. But the other thing is, reputable brands who've been around a little while generally are using the better materials. Not always, there are some up and coming brands making great things as well. But the weight and the construction is going to play a factor. So when you're looking at how the weight rating that the tripod will support, 500-gram tripod can't carry a 100-kilo camera kit. That's just ridiculous. But then it's also going to depend on how good are the locking mechanisms, how good are each of the hinges, how good are all of the parts in the head. That's going to add potentially cost and weight to the tripod, and you have to make that. We're going to come back to that as we go through the different points in your final buying trade-off decision, but I'll tell you now, factoring in the weight of the tripod is something I think most people underestimate, and you really want to give it some consideration. We'll talk about that more in the conclusion. Now, in terms of the legs of the tripod, obviously they're all going to have 3 generally. Monopod isn't a tripod after all. But something you want to think about is how many segments they have and what is the construction material. You can get, the main options are aluminium or aluminum, depending on where you are in the world, carbon fiber, or there are still wooden tripods out there. Now, wood is going to be usually the heaviest, but also less likely to have vibrations. Carbon fiber controls vibration better than aluminum, and it's lighter. But then you get to a little catch-22 where if it's too light, a big gust of wind could start to blow it over. So you do need to balance all of that out. And generally speaking, the more segments of legs, the less stable it's going to be. If you have a tripod that just has 3 big sturdy columns, as opposed to one that has 6 and they're gradually getting smaller and smaller in thickness, like, see this little guy? Its final leg segment is narrower than my pinky. So you can't be expecting that this is going to really be super stable if you're shooting with a heavy kit. So having fewer leg segments will overall mean it's going to be shorter or heavier, or it won't pack down as small, but it generally is going to make it more stable. Next consideration is the center post. Now, some tripods have this. It's not just are they cheap or are they expensive, because this is a fairly expensive tripod and it has one, but this. It gives you that extra potential amount of height, but it is absolutely going to add potential for wobble in your shots. It's like getting a stable tripod and then putting a monopod on top of it. At the bottom setting, locked down, it shouldn't move at all. No quality tripod should. But even once it's up a few inches, there's the potential for it. If nothing else, the physics, it's just throwing the whole balance off. Your center of gravity is so far above the center of the tripod that there's a higher chance of introducing wobble, apart from the fact that it's then putting all of the weight on the camera just on this joint, and if it's not completely locked down, you're going to fairly easily get a little bit of movement in there. They can be handy, but generally I try not to use it. And I'm talking to my videographer right now because he's using the small video tripod and his center column is up, so I hope the close-up shots are nice and stable. Next up is the type of plate or quick release system it's using. Generally, I would want to be using some kind of quick release system these days. One of the reasons that I go with these different systems, the monopod is an exception, is for tripods, you have a lot of different options. Some brands are using proprietary ones, but there's a kind of a standard, or one that a lot of brands are able to use, that's called Arca Swiss, and there's so many different kinds of heads out there that will fit Arca Swiss, from ones that are quite gigantic and will take a big heavy camera to much smaller lighter ones to their own branded ones. This is actually a Gitzo plate. And then they're usable across every brand that's using an Arca Swiss head. Great thing about having a single system, like I said, we have this video tripod, we have the smaller one you saw, and then we have a teeny weeny one. They all use exactly the same plate. They come in all different lengths, of course, because this one can take 8 inches of tract and the little one can only take 2, but to have them all be compatible is really nice. And if you're using a carrying system, like I happen to use Black Rapid straps, if you're using one of these other ones, this one has an area that will let you put a little latch on it so it can go straight onto the tripod without having to take that off. And there are some Arca Swiss ones out there that will let you put your Black Rapid adapter in here, take your camera off the Black Rapid, and it can go straight into the tripod without having to change the plate that you're using. Really handy. Now, the last 2 points we want to talk through here are starting to overlap each other, but they're important. The second to last is the tripod foot type, or the options it gives you. For most tripods out there, or a lot anyway, it's going to come with up given foot, and that's just what it is. People often don't think about it. But if you have specialized shooting needs, having the option to change them is really handy. You'll find most stills tripods are fitted with either plastic or rubber feet. Plastic generally being cheaper, rubber a bit more expensive. Rubber is better because if you're going to be shooting in sub-freezing temperatures, plastic can crack and break more easily. But a lot of tripods, like these ones, give you the option to screw off the foot and put different kinds of feet onto them. Now, that's good and bad, because if you're not going to change them, having the foot be able to come off could potentially get lost. But it is also another thing, like at the cafe when your table isn't quite level, you may be able to adjust one of these if your terrain is really rocky. Then you have metal feet, which are great for shooting outdoors in certain situations. Then you can put onto a spiked one. Now, a tripod like this guy, oh, he's like a freaking bazooka, actually has 2 options. So underneath the foot here, we can actually switch and then use the spiked foot instead. I really feel like Stallone or something. Kadoosh, kadoosh, kadoosh. But that can be quite handy to be able to go from one to the other. Let's just put this down straight so I don't put a big hole in my table. And the final thing, which is related to that and that very specific use application, is overall stability. And it's time to start thinking about how you shoot. When I say being taller or bigger or this or that is going to be better or more stable. You have to think about how you're actually going to use it and what's going to be stable for you. Yes, having a 25 kilo wooden tripod with the biggest, heaviest head out there will mean you have the minimal chance of getting any wobble in your shot, even if a huge truck drives just past where you're shooting. But are you actually going to carry that out? And that feeds in nicely to my little conclusion of the 3 things you have to boil down, in essence, to decide which tripod is going to be best for you, and what helps to explain the cost of these things. Firstly is what I call the compression ratio. How tall does it go up versus how small does it pack down? That does matter, and that includes things like what material, how many leg segments are going to feed into that, because if it's going to compress a lot, it needs to have a lot of segments. If they're aluminium, that's going to really potentially add weight and a lack of stability. If it's carbon fiber, it's going to add a lot of price to have multiple segments there. So you have to figure that out. And is being able to pack it up the most important? Is being able to go really high the most important? Or are both of them important for you? The next is price, and I can't answer that for you. Some people's budget will be $20, some people's budget will be $1,000, and tripods go from probably below $20 to certainly above $1,000. So when you think about what features you need, think about what trade-offs you're willing to make to get it into your budget. And the final one that I think really isn't given enough attention is the weight. And it does come down to a little pyramid here, because if you want it to be light and have a good compression ratio but still be stable, it's going to be a high-end brand like Gitzo with carbon fiber and magnesium that cut the weight but stay stable. Your price is going to skyrocket. If you need to keep the price down but you want the compression ratio, then you're going to have to sacrifice on weight because it's going to be using less sophisticated materials, and so on. That kind of pyramid is what we're all dealing with. But I can tell you, as someone who leads photography tours all around the world with people who are really into photography, who aren't just, casual or lazy about it, big heavy tripods get left in the bus. It's just how it is. Unless it's a situation where we're definitely going to be using a tripod all day. If you have a really lightweight one that may be a little bit less sturdy and not quite as tall as you'd like it, and if it's a day where it might come in handy but it might not, this will get taken with you 8 out of 10 times. This, which is just that much heavier, which is like this plus a bottle of water plus, a second lens, often gets left in the bus. So really think about that practically. Do you need the biggest, most stable, heaviest, or would something smaller and lighter that you'll actually take out with you be the best? Because after all, having the best, most expensive, shiniest equipment that stays in the bus or back home because you didn't even pack it is worthless. Whatever is out there with you in the field actually helping you get shots is priceless. So I hope you found that useful, folks. Please do subscribe and turn on notifications. I put out 1 or 2 videos every week. I'm trying to make my content be as useful and informative and fun, all things to do with photography and tech. And if you want to take it a step further and actually really delve deep into different photography topics, check out my 2 websites, mattgrangerphotography.com and artnudeportraiture.com, where you can find dozens of complete downloadable or streamable tutorials on specific photography topics. Thanks, folks. Happy shooting.